All right, welcome. We're going to go ahead and get started here tonight. We're going to talk a little bit about the nuclear power plant project. Um, but before that, I wanted to just take a little bit of time, review a little bit of material on the lesson to kind of help you get through the project. But with that said, really, there's four main objectives that this project seeks for you to accomplish in that being able to describe the components of a nuclear reactor and explain what they're used for, being able to explain the difference between a BWR and a PWR, okay, explain how fast breed reactors work, and why the technology isn't really used that much anymore, and then obviously describing the stages of nuclear fuel cycle. So with that, let's talk a little bit about some introductory, some introductory information here. You know, your lesson talked a little bit about the math problem or the question that really it was posed to you about having a choice if you had the opportunity, or were given a choice between a one-time, $1 million payment or having the option to start with a penny and double the value each day for a month. Okay, what would you choose? Okay, when you look at it from that perspective, sure, having that $1 million payout is really really nice, but having 10 million, a little more than $10 million, is a much better amount at the end of the month. So it's not necessarily what you see up front. It's what compounds over time. Okay, nuclear reactions are very much that essence, and in the same way in that they're like doubling daily amounts. Okay, with each reaction multiple offers can be set forth or set off in the form of a sequence or in a chain, where nuclear reactions, if you're not careful, can be difficult to control. So when you think about it from that perspective, nuclear energy has what appears to be a very unlimited capacity. Okay, so when you look at what happens in terms of nuclear energy, obviously we have to talk about the reactor component. Okay, and reactors are nothing more than devices where chain reactions are initiated and they're controlled, for the purposes of producing energy, for the purposes of producing electrical power. Okay, that reaction that takes place in a reactor really seeks to take advantage of the natural ability of uranium isotopes, to easily break apart, and in doing so, releasing significant amounts, of energy. Okay, how does that happen? It happens obviously when you start to bombard those atoms, the core of those atoms, with neutrons. All right. When you start to bombard them, they become unstable, and as a result of their instability, they break apart into smaller atoms, which, in most cases, are barium and krypton. Okay. Now they also release neutrons, and those neutrons also continue the chain reaction or the process of fission, which thereby releases the large amounts of energy, which the nuclear industry really really seeks to, capitalize on. So, with that, in your lesson, it talked about the parts of a typical nuclear reactor. Okay, and when you break them down, it doesn't matter whether they're BWRs or PWRs. They have almost the exact same components. It's just, in one reactor, obviously, the water is pressurized, and in the BWRs, the water actually boils to create the steam, inside the core, which then helps turn a turbine. So, make sure you're familiar with some of the components, the core itself, where the fuel is kept. The feed water pumps is what allows to move water into and out of the core. Okay, the control rods, which are your moderators, which help to control the reaction. The containment structure, which in some instances you'll hear called the dry well. Your steam generator, your turbine, your condenser cooling water, and then of course your cooling tower. Okay, so make sure you understand those components and what they do, as you go through the lesson and as you're doing this project. Okay. Again, like I said, the difference between PWRs and BWRs, there's really five main points of how they work. So you should check that out in your lesson. Okay. And then, of course, finally, leading up to the fuel cycle and the main parts in the fuel cycle. Um, Again, there's multiple points, but there's really three main parts in the nuclear fuel cycle. So it's basically the progression of fuel from mining all the way to its waste disposal stage. Okay, so those are the highlights of the chapter. Now let's actually take a look at the actual project. Okay, so the project asks you in 2 to 3 sentences, explain the importance of the following components in a nuclear reactor. Okay, the control rods, the containment structure, or what some call the dry well, and then a moderator. Okay, so I'm looking for this in about 2 to 3 sentences each. Okay, what they are. So basically, you're just essentially defining these terms in your own words for me. Okay, you can find that information in the lesson, or you can find that information certainly online at the Institutes of Nuclear Power Operators, at the United States Regulatory Commission. So you have multiple means. Okay. Second, in a few sentences. When I say a few sentences, I'm looking for 5 to 6 sentences here. Compare and contrast the difference between PWRs and BWRs. So I'm looking for the main differences between the two. Okay. In addition to this, if you'd like, you can give me a chart. You can do a chart in Word that gives a side-by-side comparison and a contrast of each of the two, similarities and differences. All right. Number three, explain why spent nuclear fuel rods have been treated as have to be treated as hazardous waste. Okay, again, information you can find right in your lesson. Okay, doesn't require a lengthy answer. Just in terms of think about it from an environmental perspective. All right. And then the last question, fast breeding reactors. Fast breeder reactors are seldom used anymore because of safety concerns as they have higher potential for explosions. But this explosion hazard has not come from actually the nuclear fissioning process, okay? What does it come from? And explain your answers to me, okay, again. So I'm looking for 3 or 4 sentences here for you to talk about, um, you know, where does it come from and what, you know, what if a leak should occur, what could cause the explosion. Okay, so you're looking for that component. And again, you can find that information on breeder reactors right in the lesson, right towards the end of the lesson after it talks about the types of nuclear reactors. Okay, so it's on pages 6 and 7 of the lesson. So that's the project. Doesn't really require any major extensive outside research. If you do have a problem with it, certainly I would encourage you to come into the VO. I can certainly help you out and point you in the right direction. And we'll be back here again next week going over another project. Have a great week, everyone.